This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Donald Trump's former trade representative and assistant to the president, Peter Navarro, an economist, also devised part of the fake elector scheme and got found guilty of contempt of Congress. His refusal to comply with the Jan 6 committee warrants and subpoenas got himself a number of months in jail as a result, but he's not out of hot water yet because a senior status judge in the District of Columbia Federal Court, Judge Colleen Kolar-Catelli, who was appointed by Bill Clinton, happens to be 80 years old and does a fantastic job in her role of wearing a black robe and adjudicating justice. She's this close, and for those that are listening to me on audio, my fingers are just about a half an inch apart. She's this close to finding Peter Navarro in contempt because he's still clinging and holding on to presidential records that belong to the National Archive, which means they belong to you and me. Does that sound familiar? There's an entire criminal prosecution against Donald Trump going on in front of Judge Aileen Cannon. Just to continue the C's, Aileen Cannon in Florida, in Fort Pierce, in the Southern District of Florida. There's a whole case about sticky fingers Trump holding on to these documents that belong to you and me, national defense information and other documents, and not turning them over to the National Archive. Well, Peter Navarro, birds of a feather, following his mentor's lead, right into a contempt proceeding. Now, the judge gave Peter Navarro, for those that are his defenders, plenty of time to comply. I'm talking about what is going on a year to figure out with his mass of documents and piles of documents that apparently he left his service in the White House with under his arms and in his laptops. She's let him review them. In fact, the judge reports in her 6-page order that just came out that it is beyond a reasonable doubt, if you will, that the Peter Navarro has retained at least hundreds of pages of presidential records despite court order, meaning he has to have, right now she's entered an order to show cause as to why he should not be found in contempt for having done that. She says that way back in May of 2023, so we're coming up on, almost a year, the court proposed the deadline by which defendant would produce presidential records in his possession. So he's had a year to figure out what's in the box, what's in the pile, to, or as the judge said, search for and identify all presidential records generated across any and all of his personal accounts on which he transacted official business, and using certain search parameters that were provided to him by the other side, the United States of America, at a minimum. That's on page 1 of her order. Then she gave him some additional delay. She even allowed, talk about bending over backwards, she even allowed the lawyers for Peter Navarro and Peter Navarro to do an audit, to take a look at, let's say 50 or so emails and report back to the court what percentage of them, providing them to her, were presidential records, to try to argue he doesn't have a lot of presidential records at all. Now, the first thing she says is that presidential records, which are not personal in nature, have to be turned over to the National Archive. No ifs, ands, or buts. It doesn't matter if you were the president or you were one of his special advisors. And after going through what his title was, she says, let's take a look at and this is on page 4 of her order, let's take a look at a random sampling, an audit of the documents that he did not produce. And out of the 50 that she took a look at herself in an in-camera review, we call it in-camera, when a judge looks at it without the prying eyes of the public, she said, I found at least 24% of what you gave me are presidential records. And she cited case law that said that's a very high number, that if you have an error rate that's above 24%, which is what this is, give or take, that generally means, as the courts have showed, that there is an intransigence, a foot dragging by the producing party that is unacceptably high, and that it demonstrates that many documents have been improperly withheld. So the court said, your audit, Mr. Navarro, didn't help you. It hurt you. So the judge concluded on page 5 of her order, in sum, based on the court's review of defendant's own random sampling, it is clear that defendant continues to possess presidential records that have not been produced to their rightful owner, the United States. It is likewise clear that defendant's error rate, this 24%, is not minimal or negligible. It's unacceptably high. So the judge concluded that he has, he's directed once again to reprocess the remaining records in his possession, which she said amounts to about 600 records. She gave him 1 month to do it and to identify for her other responsive documents that need to be produced, and she assigned a magistrate judge to keep an eye over the whole thing. But she entered an order to show cause. So the order reads, accordingly, plaintiff, the United States of America's motion to enforce the earlier order of the judge to compel the production and return of these documents to the National Archive is granted. Defendant is ordered to show cause why he should not be held in contempt on or before March 21. So he's got till March 20th to turn over the documents that are presidential records out of the 600, with a magistrate judge determining that for her, and the next day to tell the judge why he shouldn't be found in contempt. So justice doesn't end at the water's edge of the day you hear a clink of the metal door as you enter a federal penitentiary. And Colleen Kolar-Catelli is a role model, senior judge appointed by Clinton. She's now 80. And people like Judge Aileen Cannon, who are fumbling their way through the Mar-a-Lago process, should take this as a teachable moment and learn from this senior status judge. I'll continue to follow all things Peter Navarro. One place, the MeidasTouch Network. Don't change that dial. You're already here. And the over 2 million strong subscriber base, free subscriptions. Help them get to 3 million before the election on November 5th. The bigger they get, the more your voice is heard. And then follow me on a podcast we call Legal AF. The title is exactly what you think. We do it on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube, right here on this channel, and then on audio podcast platforms of your choice. So until my next podcast, until my next hot take, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.